Good morning. Good morning. All right, we'll start with New York City. And this is our morning group of 25. And it's called the group of 25 because the very first meeting consisted of 25 students, and it began, incidentally, right here in New York. By now, this group is about 250 instead of 25, and it functions around the clock. That means if it is 10:30 in New York City right now, where we are functioning, it's 9:30 in Chicago, and somebody is functioning there. And it's 10:30 further west, and somebody's functioning there, or 8:30 rather, and 7:30 still further west. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning somewhere else, and somebody is functioning. And so completely around the clock, some members of the group of 25, which really is over 250, is functioning somewhere in the world, and functioning for a specific purpose. To understand that purpose, you have to understand, first of all, the basic principles of the infinite way. And the first is this: we have discovered why there is sin, disease, and death in the world. We have discovered why there is lack and limitation and why there are wars. And we have discovered something more. We've discovered how to eliminate these errors. Now, we haven't proven it on the level of the wars. We haven't proven it on the level of the major world problems, but that isn't of any more significance than the fact that when the Wright brothers sent up their airplane for 57 seconds, they proved that you could go around the world in an airplane. The mere fact that it could stay up 57 seconds under control meant that it was only a question of time when they could stay up 57 hours. And when they went 100 miles an hour, they proved for all times that you could go 1,000 miles. It was just a matter of construction, of engineering. So it is, when the first metaphysical healing took place, if it was only a simple headache or indigestion, it proved for all time that any and every disease in the world could be met. It was just a question of developing the principle and then developing the consciousness necessary to bring it about. Now then, the first thing that advanced students of the infinite way must know is this. It would be good if beginners could know it, but they can't receive it. They can't grasp it. That the personalization of error, or the personalization of good, is the major cause of all error in the world. Or, we could put it the other way, that impersonalization of good and impersonalization of evil is the secret of bringing harmony. Now, the world for thousands of years has been praying in a personal way, trying to address an infinite spiritual God to heal your or my body, or your dog or my dog. And of course, the only answers it gets are the accidental ones. There's no principle of prayer that's ever been discovered by a church that actually works. The nearest is the metaphysical work that's being done. Outside of the metaphysical field, the prayers of the rest of the world are just so much waste time. It makes no difference what their denomination or religion may be. And the reason is that their prayer is a personalization both of God and of man. And there is no such God. God cares just as much for a blade of grass as it does for $1 million crop of cotton. God cares just as much for one lone pear tree in your yard as for an entire orchard of fruit trees or an entire state of oil wells. God is no respecter of persons, and God is no respecter of your conditions or my conditions. God is infinite being, and God is no respecter of persons. God isn't going to heal your person or my person, or your child or my child, unless God could heal every person and every child. Then you could talk about prayer being effective. But so long as it's aimed only at doing something for you or me, you're certainly operating outside the realm of God. You're operating in personal sense. If you think for a minute that God can be molded to do my will or your will, you can mold your will to the divine and find that you will never in your life have a discord, in proportion as you can mold your will to the divine. But trying to mold God's will to your need or my need is just the same type of stupidity that's been going on in the religious world for thousands of years. And if anyone thinks it isn't stupidity, just look at the results out in the world. Now, it is true that in the kingdom of God, there is neither sin, disease, nor death. But that must mean that in the kingdom of God there are no persons either to experience sin, disease, or death. And as long as you have persons who can experience sin, disease, or death, you're outside the realm of God. And you can't bring God down to that sick or sinning person. All you can do is lift that person up out of personal sense into God. Then you really see the result of prayer. Now, what binds us then to sin, disease, death, lack, limitation on the personal, individual level? But this personal sense, false sense of person, limited, finite sense of person. And above all things, we've discovered how that came into existence through the belief of good and evil. The minute there is no belief in your mind of good and evil, the minute you are making no distinction between good and evil, or in proportion, since there isn't anybody that has completely overcome that belief of good and evil. Jesus Christ said he had. I have overcome the world, but we haven't had any record since then of anyone saying that they have completely overcome the world. It means that you've overcome the sense of good and evil, and no longer say this is good and that is evil. Now, and we're applying this at this moment in individual experience. This is your experience and mine that we're interested in at this moment, because there's no use trying to save New York City or Los Angeles, California, or the world until we've at least demonstrated we can save ourselves. If we don't have 57 seconds in the air, don't try to go around the world. Let's be sure we have control of ourselves for 57 seconds. Then we can start out with the world. So our demonstration becomes an individual one on the level of myself or yourself. And how do we go about it? In the infinite way, we don't have sympathy and we don't have pity. We don't allow any personal sense to enter our thought regarding any person or situation, because we're dealing with a principle. That principle says that all error may be summed up in certain words or terms. And we have used, for instance, the term carnal mind, the term Paul used. The carnal mind as a blanket word for all forms of evil, whether it's some false desire, false appetite, some sin, some disease, some lack, some limitation, unemployment, fruit flies, whatever it may be. We have learned to impersonalize. Therefore, we do not say ever that you are sinful or he or she is sinful. Nor do we say that you are sick or he or she is sick, or that you or he or she is responsible for your sickness by wrong thinking, or that you can correct it by right thinking. Our entire work is based on the fact that the sum total of error, of evil, of any name or nature, can be included in that term, carnal mind, or the one that Mrs. Eddy gave it, mortal mind. Jesus used the term, your father the devil. But what he actually demonstrated was that your father the devil is a nothingness without power. On that basis he healed. This is of your father the devil, therefore it's nothing. Get out. Now, if you see any form of error as a person or condition, from the standpoint of the infinite way, you're licked. You can't heal. You can't improve. You can't change. You can't reform. The minute sympathy or pity enters your thought, you might as well go back to some other work, get into some other activity or some other religion, because you're not going to go far in this work. In this work, person has nothing to do, not even with their own troubles. They didn't cause it, they didn't bring it on, they're victims of it. You say, what about the person who insists on drinking alcohol or spending more than they earn? They're not cause, they're effect. The carnal mind is still operating in them. When it isn't, they won't be that way. There's no use trying to change them, because even if you change them and you haven't touched the carnal mind, they're going to get that way again. In other words, the Master said, you sometimes get rid of one error to make room for 7. Or, go and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. In other words, even if you remove an erroneous effect from any person's life and you don't change their consciousness, you're just leaving them a victim for the same thing or some other thing, or twice as many things, to come back on them tomorrow or the day after. So in no case is healing your main object. It is the change of consciousness that is your main object. The healing is a natural result. Now, when you begin to understand this, and you learn to do your daily protective work for yourself, and if you'll notice that throughout our monthly letters, in every single year, there's at least one important letter on the subject of protective work, and this year probably more, because I've observed now in my travels that most of our students completely ignore this work. They would rather have a nice absolute teaching where you sit on cloud 9, flap your wings and say there is no error, and then wonder why you fall off and hit the ground. You can't do that with any spiritual teaching. This is not a teaching of blind faith. This is not a teaching where you have a nice personal God all your own that's taking care of you because you're a metaphysician or an infinite way student. This is a teaching where ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This teaching doesn't say anything about God. God's already doing its work. God's already about its own business. God is already functioning beautifully, maintaining 2 times 2 is 4. Do, re, mi is do, re, mi. Grass from grass, apples from apples, peaches from peaches. Oh, God's work is going on beautifully. You can't find any lack or limitation in God's world, not even in the physical world. There's just as many blades of grass in a depression as in a boom. Just as many apples, just as many oranges, just as many of everything. Oh no, there's nothing wrong with God's world. What's wrong is with our sense of God's world. Therefore, the entire responsibility is up to you and me to govern our lives in accord with God's laws. Now, the first thing we have to do is this daily protective work. Not in the sense that we're protecting ourselves from evil. Heaven forbid that anyone should do that. But protecting ourselves from this universal belief in a power apart from God. Protecting ourselves. In other words, opening our consciousness to the truth that I in the midst of me is the only power, and that this carnal mind is not a law, not a power, not a presence, not a cause, can have no effect. But the carnal mind is inoperative wherever it is recognized as no substance, no presence, no power. That goes back to the allness of God, but with the specific realization that we're not demonstrating the allness of God as long as there is a trace of sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, or even aging in our bodies, minds, lives. Now, the second part of our work is in living the principles of the infinite way. For instance, we understand from our work that good does not come to us. There isn't even a God to give us good. The God that we understand is a God of grace that's always functioning. It's always giving, sharing, bestowing. Not in any personal sense, but in the same sense that the sun is always pouring out light and warmth, and nobody has to pray about that. Don't give any thought at all to the sun. It's always about its own business of giving light and warmth. You'll notice the tides come in and go out without anybody praying for it. You'll notice how all of these things of God keep functioning. Only man seems to think that he doesn't function, that he just sits and lets something else function to him. And therefore, whatever he thinks of love, he thinks of love coming to him. And of course, by that very belief, he shuts out any possibility of love ever reaching him. There just is no way for love to reach the person who's looking for it or seeking it, wanting it or desiring it. There's no way. It doesn't operate that way. It's just as if the sun were to stood around waiting for light and warmth. It can't get them. It has to express them. So our discovery has been that the only love that will ever come into my life is the love that I let flow out from me. The only supply that I'm ever going to enjoy is the supply that I let flow out from me. Heaven forbid if I should sit around praying for supply to come in, or expecting it, or even to look to anyone for gratitude or cooperation or appreciation. That's all a denial of God, because my good comes from God. Not tomorrow, million, billion years ago, in the beginning. It was incorporated in my being. All I have to do is to keep pushing it out. The harder and the faster I push it out, the harder and the faster it pours in. Whether we're thinking of supply of dollars or supply of love or supply of gratitude or supply of health or supply of anything else, the very belief that any of these can come to me puts me back into old theology where all I've got is 80 years and 10 and a resting place out in Forest Hill. But life eternal is demonstrated by knowing God. And the only way I can know God is to know that God constitutes my being. Therefore, my being is infinite, and now I have to act it. Now, if I follow the Master, and I try, even when I fail, I'm still trying, but when I follow the Master, I find out that prayer is of no avail when it's limited to my friends, relatives, patients, or students. That if I'm not praying for the enemy, I'm not praying. If I follow the Master, I learn that if I gave away every dollar I have in the bank and somebody knew about it, it would do me no good spiritually. My alms must be secretly done. And not only to my friends or relatives, but universally. If I follow the Master, I know that I can't seek anything that inflates my ego. Even to be caught praying is to be building my own ego, because men will think I'm good or religious. If I follow the Master, I understand that I'm not loving God supremely while I'm not loving man. Therefore, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. So it is only then in proportion as my life is a life of givingness that my life is a life of godliness, goodness, in health, harmony, wholeness, completeness, perfection. Now then, this poses two questions for us. The first one is, am I training myself never to judge, criticize, condemn person, but to realize that I'm not dealing with the errors of person, I'm dealing with the errors of universal sense. So that when I do see a person in some negative position, whether it's sin, lack, limitation, disease, death, old age, that instead of letting my thought go to them, I instantly go to the fact, this is a product of the carnal mind or mortal mind or the arm of flesh, which is nothingness. There's no power here. This is only the result of somebody, especially the world itself, believing in these two powers, good and evil. And when I nullify the belief of power in the carnal mind, I find it nullified in the experience of the individual who has come seeking that help. Now, when we begin through our daily protective work, our daily meditations, to impersonalize both good and evil, realize whatever good there is really God. It isn't personal. It hasn't anything to do with person, even though they may be the instrument for it. In other words, I'm in the position very often of receiving very generous checks from some students, and I thank them, and I'm deeply appreciative that they are so receptive to the divine impulse, but I never forget that it's really God supporting the infinite way activity around the globe. It's God doing that. The receptive individual is an instrument. Well, you're in the same position when you're witnessing me at work out here, so you can't help being grateful and appreciative that it's happening. But you'd lose the whole demonstration if you didn't see that I was but an instrument through which, or as which, this infinity was operating in your consciousness. And that it wasn't me being good to you, it was your own consciousness drawing to you your own. Therefore, if I want to retire any time, it'll be no loss to you, because your consciousness will draw unto you your own. So it has to be somebody else or some other book or God itself. It'll always be. But if you personalize it, as some of them did in the old days, the master had to say, if I go not away, the Comforter will not come to you. You'll never realize then that this good that's coming to you through this person is the good that your own state of consciousness is drawing to you. And no person's going to stay on this earth forever. And so in the logical course of events, there may be loads and loads of people who in course of time will have to keep realizing that God itself appears to them in whatever form is necessary, human, book, or whatever. Now, it is in the same way that, just speaking as a group, that any of us could make mistakes. Any kind of mistake is possible to us. But our ability to impersonalize it brings about healing, brings about forgiveness. And the only time when we stop with each other is where we come to a place where the individual in his human obstinacy says, no, you're not going to change me or correct me. I'm going to keep doing what I want to keep doing. Then is when we have to withdraw from them. We still won't criticize or condemn them, but we'll certainly recognize that you're now no part of my demonstration. I have to go on, even if I leave behind mother, brother, sister, father, and all the rest of the family. I must go on. Now so, we forgive 70 times 7, but we may only forgive once or twice the person that we find, or rather, keep going with them, insistent on their own way. All right. Now we've come to a place where we see two things. First of all, we must recognize all evil, regardless of its form, as this universal hypnotism or carnal mind or mortal mind. And then we must be sure that we do not set it up as a power opposite God. Don't go back to God and devil, good and evil. Don't go back to believing God is a great power over this evil, or that will do something to this evil. Be sure that you stand firm in this. Evil isn't a power. Evil hasn't a law to maintain it. Evil hasn't a consciousness to sustain it. Evil can only exist as long as there is personal sense to continue it. Then the second part of our work is the ability ourselves to live in a state of forgiving 70 times 7, live in a state of give, of love, of mutuality, of cooperation, not only with each other, but in our relationships so far as they permit it to the rest of the world. Now, when we have done these things, we've not only eliminated a great many of the evils of our individual experience, but actually we find that we're doing healing work for ourselves and for others, because all there is to healing work is the impersonalization of error. That's all there is to it. The ability not to hate, love, or fear the appearance of error. And understand that regardless of what form it assumes, behind it is the substance of it, which is the fabric of nothingness. We have lots of tapes on that subject of the fabric of nothingness. And so it is. Whatever form of evil you behold is merely a form, the substance of which is this fabric of hypnotism, mortal mind, carnal mind, the arm of flesh, nothingness, which we have learned to hate, to fear, or to love. Now, here you have the life that is supposed to be led by the Infinite Way student with some knowledge of its principles. Those that take the Infinite Way that seriously as to make an effort to live this life eventually come to the place where you are, where your life is in some measure dedicated to the Infinite Way. Not to a cause or a movement, because we don't have any, but to the principle of living the Infinite Way, which you wish to spread abroad in the world. Now, we don't spread it by proselyting. We don't spread it by missionary work. We spread it only by the degree of harmony that we show forth in our own lives and the attention that it attracts those it draws to us for whatever it is we have, so that our entire work is more or less that of a spiritual underground. Now, by our living this way, by our support of the activities of this work, we have announced ourselves as being a part of that invisible bond that unites all of us. And so we are led then to this group which started with 25 and which now goes around the world, which is dedicated to a higher purpose than meeting your needs or mine. The purpose of this particular group is the meeting of world problems with the principles which we are learning and which we are applying in our individual experiences. Now, let us see how this operates. Because by your being here, you have made yourself a part of this work and you have an obligation. The first obligation is secrecy. There is nobody, supposedly, there is nobody in this world who knows of our work except ourselves. That is, if you have been faithful, you have told nobody about this group of 25, or its activity, or what it does, or even that there is such a group in all the world. Nobody outside of ourselves is supposed to know this. The reason is, like everything else, once you announce something, you draw the antagonism of the entire world upon yourself and upon your activity. And if you hope to succeed in a spiritual work, you can do it better by not being crucified and having your work brought to an end. Now, in a local way, supposing that your newspapers, radio, television, announces that an epidemic is on the way to your particular community. That's where you would immediately begin to function. You and anyone living in your vicinity who is a part of this group should get together. Now, of course, your work is done alone every day. I'm speaking now of a specific instance where something of a public nature comes to light, like an epidemic on the way, or a tornado, or a tidal wave, terrific storm, threatened war. You individually do this, and as fast as you can collectively, with anyone around you in your community who you know to be a part of this group. And you begin right there and then to nullify this experience that's due to strife. How? First of all, by realizing that whatever its name or nature, it has its origin in the carnal mind or mortal mind or the arm of flesh. And it is not a presence and it is not a power. Actually, it is a mind creation, not a God creation. It's a creation that comes out of the mind of men. God never started an epidemic of anything. God never started a tornado. God never started a volcano. Elijah saw that. God isn't in any of those things. But there is a remedy, there is an antidote for them. That is the still small voice. So that all you have to do is to sit and begin to the conscious remembrance of your principles. What am I faced with here? An appearance, an evil appearance, a form of evil, any form, epidemic, storm, war, animality of the human mind. Yes, but where does it have its rise? In the human mind, in the carnal mind, the mortal mind. Is it ordained of God? No. Has it God's blessings? No. Does God prosper it? No. What then is it to maintain or sustain it? Nothing but the belief and the fears of man whose breath is in his nostrils. That isn't a power. For all power is God power. And only God is power. Only the still small voice is power. And it's sufficient power to still any storm, at sea or on land or in the air. Now, recognizing this, I sit back and in a few minutes I feel God's peace upon me. Or the voice really gives me a message, Bible passage. In some way or other, I have the realization that God has spoken. Nothing left now but for the earth to melt. Now, because of the tenacity of universal belief, I may have to return to this an hour from now and do it again. I have to send for 3 or 4 friends who are part of this group. And let all sit and realize it together. 2 or more gather together, support each other, uphold each other, make it easy for each other to settle back into peace. And we persist in this until the danger is past, until the situation has been met. And I want you to know how effective this is, that throughout the epidemic of Asian flu last year, not one of our practitioners anywhere around the globe reported a single case among our students. Not one. Not one has come into my mail, and from everyone who has written me, not one has brought forth a case of Asian flu. And in the very few cases where some of our practitioners met it outside of our student body, they met it usually in a few hours instead of days. Now, this is the power of what has happened. We, of course, can't offer proof that our work was effective in this following case, although we believe that it was. But we sat in Hawaii when we were threatened with a hurricane. A hurricane that the Weather Bureau plotted for us to hit us smack in the middle of the island. And at 97 or 99 miles an hour, and it was going to just tear things loose. Well, they really tied down the whole island and everything on it to be prepared for this great tragedy. They even closed the schools. But our little group kept meeting all day and into the night. And on the second day, first place, it was postponed 24 hours by not catching up to it. And then, as it got nearer, we learned that they'd made a mistake. It wasn't going to hit in the middle of the island, it was going to hit the tip of the island. Well, I want you to know that when it hit 175 miles away from any island. None of our islands was hurt. And the school children had a holiday. Sammy says it's a Goldsmith holiday because they all went out and had their fun all day. There wasn't a bit of a storm outside on the day when schools were closed and everything was tightened down with anchors. Now, you'd have a hard time convincing us that the realization that took place up at Halley Cove for 36 hours there didn't have something to do for this reason, that when the newspapers went to the Weather Bureau, and remember they had not only charted it there, but they sent airplanes out to go into the heart of the storm to chart it, and then asked what was wrong. They said, we can't understand it, it just turned off. But there's no reason for it. We can't find a reason for it. It just happened that way. And that's the end of that. Now, you see what we're driving at is this. This was indicated last night. There's only one real secret that the Infinite Way has. And that is that what we're up against in the entire world is temporal power or spiritual power. Which is the real? I mean, that's the whole basis of Jesus' teaching. When he came to this plane, the only powers were known were temporal powers. Whether it was the temporal power of swords and spears, armies, or the temporal power of governments, the temporal power of dictatorships, the temporal power even of the synagogue, of the temple. Everything was temporal power. And now he comes along and he announces the most startling statement that's ever been made in the history of the world. My kingdom is not of this world. You can search the literature of all the peoples of all times, but you can't find a more startling statement than that. My kingdom is not of this world. Put up your sword. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. But now look, if we're going to put up the sword, what do you want us to do? Die? No, I just told you that if you don't put up the sword, you'll die. Well, then what do I do if I put up the sword? You resist not evil. You don't blame the world, do you, for saying that it's crazy and it can't be done? It's impractical? You have to be of spiritual illumination before you can really believe that there is a power greater than temporal power. And that in the face of this other power, temporal power doesn't even exist. It isn't even a power anymore. Even the grave can't contain him. He is risen. Do you see why it takes spiritual discernment to understand and to demonstrate the infinite way? The infinite way says with Jesus Christ, put up your sword. Temporal power isn't power. There's another power which is no power. And no power is the only power. The still small voice, just what Elijah said. The still small voice. This little thing that's whispered in here stops storms out here. Deflects epidemics. Oh, I know this, that we could do it on a much wider scale if the world were more receptive or responsive to it. But the world is putting all its faith in temporal power. And if it knew what we were doing, even while our whole motive is to save the world from its own follies, it would do more to destroy us than you can believe. It wants to be saved, but it wants to be saved in its way. It wants to be saved, but in its way, not in a spiritual way. Spiritual way involves givingness, not gettingness. And that isn't human nature. So a person can't have givingness until their human nature has been overcome. Now, if you are working this way, impersonalizing good and impersonalizing evil in your own experience, you'll find that when you come to the handling of these situations on a wider scale, that they operate. But be sure of this. Don't wait for storms to come. Do your work so that they can be dissolved without ever coming up. Don't wait for epidemics. Ours is a daily work, and those who have come to these groups have virtually promised that not less than once a day they will give a meditation period to this work for the world. And in this period, they will not think of their own lives or their families or their business or anything that's personal to them. They will devote one period each day to the realization that the carnal mind isn't power, that material sense isn't power, that if God hasn't ordained it, it has no existence. If God isn't its father, it doesn't live. And you see, in handling it on this broad scale, you're at the same time handling it for your personal self, because the lesser is always included in the greater. But the main thing is to drop all sense of self during this period and act as though you really believed that this principle can stop wars, can change the nature of dictators. I don't mean only foreign dictators, we have domestic ones too. All of the evils of the carnal mind, remember, aren't Russian or Japanese or German or Polish. And they're not Jewish and they're not Christian. The evils of the world are human sense, and you'll find them in any people, anywhere, fortunately only in a minor degree. But it's that minor degree that upsets the whole balance of the world, because they seem to take the initiative in control. The point is that we're not fighting Republicans or Democrats. We're not fighting socialists or communists. We're not fighting churches. Don't ever be guilty of going on a crusade. Don't ever be guilty of espousing a cause, because if you do, you lose your own demonstration. All evil is impersonal, and it has to be handled in an impersonal manner. And when it is handled in that manner, then your causes can prosper. In other words, your United Nations as such can't do any more for the world than the League of Nations did. As a matter of fact, a little bit less, because the United Nations was really born in sin, created in iniquity. And it was empowered to be powerless from its beginning by right of this veto. So that anybody that doesn't like what's going on, all they have to do is veto it. And that makes it inoperative. And so it was really strangled before it was born. But that doesn't mean that it can't be effective. Oh yes, they can have the right of veto and never use it. But that isn't going to be while personal sense governs or the carnal mind. That will only be when the carnal mind is so obliterated that even though they have the power of veto, they're not going to use it except for a righteous purpose. It is in the same way that the mere fact that we're infinitely students is no guarantee that we aren't going to rob, cheat, and defraud each other. There's only one guarantee of that. That is of the overcoming of the carnal mind. Once that's done, now then you can rest assured then there'll be no robbing, cheating, defrauding. But the mere membership in a group or an institution or a church or a religion is absolutely meaningless as long as the carnal mind remains present, functioning, operating. So it is. If we, through our realizations, can, in this instance, in that instance, in this instance, prove that we can nullify the activity of the carnal mind, prove its nothingness, not by fighting it, not by going on campaigns for or against, by sitting quietly, waiting for the still small voice to assure us that it is on the field, then you will find that eventually our influence will be felt around the globe. Now, it isn't an accident that the weather changes when the right spiritual atmosphere is created. It is no accident that the ranches or the orchards or the farms of those with metaphysical or spiritual understanding bear much greater fruitage than others. It isn't by accident that businesses conducted by spiritually minded men and women prosper more than other businesses. There are no accidents to that. That's all part of the divine plan. It is God's will that we bear fruit richly. Herein is God glorified that we bear fruit richly. So it's really God's function that everyone prosper, but it can't be by running counter to the laws of God. Therefore, you can't bring the laws of God to bear in your life. You can just make your life conform to the laws of God. And the first and most important part of that is the realization that there are not two powers, and that you do not fight the carnal mind, that you do not fight sin, that you do not campaign against alcoholism or drug addiction. As a matter of fact, those things really are not necessary. I can just tell you one instance. You read a great deal in the papers about the evils of drug addiction in this country. And you perhaps, like others, believe that the way hasn't been discovered to wipe this out. Don't you believe it? In 24 hours, this country could be free of any additional drug addiction, and then could go on gradually to healing those that they have on hand. But they could stop the continuation of it in any 24-hour period that they want. Only they're not permitted. Not even the government is permitted. Because the forces that want that continued prosper too much by it continuing. Shall I tell you that England has no drug addiction? They've discovered how to wipe it out of the land. England has a law that no drug addict has to buy drugs from anybody. If he's an addict, he can go to a hospital and get a shot for nothing. And the result is there are no dope sellers anymore in England because they have no customers. Nobody needs a dope seller. If you're an addict, you go to the hospital. When you go there, you are told, of course, that it's expected that insofar as is possible, you will accept some treatment to the ultimate overcoming of it. And of course, in time, many of them are healed, others aren't. They pass on. But there's no new ones coming in because there's no dope selling. Nobody's encouraged to sell it. Nobody profits by selling it. Why should you sell something you can get free? Why does anyone want to buy something you can get for nothing? Do you see that? They have wiped it out. We could too. All we have to do is say that don't buy it anymore from your dope seller, go to the hospital and we'll give you a shot and your dope racket's ended. Do you see that? There's no use crusading. No use. Women crusaded for prohibition and they got it. They got more headaches with it than they had before. Don't crusade. Turn to the spiritual principle and begin to nullify the carnal mind, where greed comes from, lust, animality, injustice, so forth and so on. And don't campaign against the carnal mind as if it were an entity that had to be overcome, but rather treat it with a gentle smile. I know thee, who thou art, nothingness. Son of your father, the devil, and he never existed. That's the purpose of this group of 25 that functions around the globe. In time, it'll be 500 or 1,000. But that, too, depends on the degree of success that we attain. In our work, you're going to find a great secret. There's no glory in it, there's no fame in it, and there's no profit in it. No one will ever know whether you stopped the tornado or not. And if you tell it to them, they won't believe it. And nobody's going to pay you for it. Nobody's going to build a monument. You're a complete anonymous person. And so it is in all of our infinite way activity. You will never really have big groups, any of you. You'll never have big audiences, any of you. The only way that you're going to fulfill yourself is in your healing work. Tape recording groups, little teaching groups, they'll evolve in time, but they'll only be feeders for the one great activity, which is healing. So, the activity that will both be enjoyable and profitable will be healing work. The rest of it will all be small group. You may have a big practice. You can have a practice like one man I knew who had 3,000 patients that he worked for every day. And he found a way to work for them and do good healing work too. Others with 1,500. And you can find a very satisfying life in the healing work and teaching. and a very profitable one, because there's nobody more grateful than a person who's been spiritually healed. It seems to bring out every bit of gratitude and thankfulness in them. But aside from that, it won't be fortunes. No one in this work will ever make a fortune. No one will ever gain fame. And for every little bit of pleasant, call it fame if you like, that you'll get an awful lot of knocks from the world, so that you'll gladly exchange your little fame for anonymity. And you'll find out why, down all these years, that as far as possible, I hide away from the world. I don't seek notoriety or fame. I don't seek public adulation. I don't seek numbers of followers. I seek to hide away in a hotel somewhere where nobody knows that I'm there. And the most that's known about me is the hotel mail clerks, who say, nobody ever gets as much mail as you do. You must be very famous. And I say, no, I'm not famous. People are just trying to borrow money. The more we can keep out of the limelight, the more we can hold our spiritual integrity. The more that we can keep away from name and fame, the more spiritual power we will embody. Because the minute it gets known, that's when we bring the antagonism and the hatred of the world upon us, and that's when crucifixion begins and all the rest of these things that really hamper your activity. Thank you. Thank you.